Senator Kennedy is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks.
Senator Kane.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all of our witnesses here today. Professor Painter, on May 5th of this year, you put out a tweet. You said, I'm going to quote, "There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's the Supreme Court." Would you tell me which members of the Supreme Court you believe are bought?
I was particularly concerned at that point when I posted that tweet.
I understand, but if you could, I've got really limited time, and I apologize for interrupting. Just tell me which members of the court you are bought.
I did not think that Justice Clarence Thomas should be failing to disclose his trips on a billionaire's yacht and airplane.
Do you think he's bought?
I believe that there is grave risk.
Do you think he's bought?
I said there is grave risk.
Do you think he's bought?
To the confidence of the American people in our Supreme Court.
Well, if you don't think he's bought, why did you say it?
I said
yes,
that
you said members of the Supreme Court are bought. You're here testifying as an expert for my Democratic friends, and you're saying the members of the Supreme Court are bought?
I said when the American people feel that way, when we have Supreme Court justices on yachts and in planes of billionaires and not being disclosed.
Anybody besides Justice Thomas you think is bought on the Supreme Court?
I believe that the court needs to clean
Anybody
up
besides
its
Justice
act.
Thomas?
I'm not going to go through each justice.
I mean, you tweeted it.
I tweeted the way the American people feel.
Did you mean it when you tweeted it?
And I stand by that tweet. This Supreme Court of the United States needs to clean up its
Let me ask you a couple others here, because you've on September 17, 2020, you tweeted, "It looks like Putin's favorite senator could lose," referring to Senator Lindsey Graham. Could you tell me your evidence for saying that Senator Graham is President Putin's favorite senator?
I don't recall that tweet and the story.
Well, I've got it. It's right here. It's right here.
I'm happy to look at the tweet, and I'm happy to write you, explain that. I don't know what that has to do with climate change.
Well, it has to do with your credibility. Did you say, what is your basis for saying that Senator Graham is President Putin's? I mean, have you ever talked to President Putin?
I have not talked to President Putin, and I would be happy to go look at the tweet and look at the story that I tweeted out and what Senator Graham had said in that context. You know, this is something
you say all this stuff. For example, you're here as an expert for my Democratic friends, and you say all this stuff. You called on September 16, 2023, a professor at the University of Chicago, very distinguished professor, Brian Leiter. You called him a racist. Can you explain to me why you think he's a racist?
I remember a series of tweets with him. He's a Marxist who put out a number of statements attacking African Americans and women. And he also was raising money for someone who had called the police on a black student for sleeping in the common room, and now has a wokekkk.com website attacking me.
That's fair enough.
So
fair enough.
I will just say one thing that I learned in high school debate, that when you have no argument, you simply change the subject.
All right. On October 15th of 2020, you said Lindsey Graham is soliciting cash payments in return for voting on a Supreme Court nomination. What evidence, that's a pretty bold statement, Professor. What evidence do you have for alleging that Senator Graham was taking cash in return for one of his votes?
I don't recall that specific tweet,
here it is, right here.
I do recall. And
do you think he was taking cash for one of his votes?
I have received campaign.
Do you think he was taking cash for one of his votes?
I'm answering your question, Senator. I have received solicitations from both political parties.
Do you think
connection
Lindsey
with
Graham was
confirmation
taking
hearings for
cash
justice.
for one of his votes? It's a simple question,
I am
Professor.
received cash solicitations for cash on my email. And yes, from both political parties in connection with Supreme Court confirmation votes.
Well, I'm out of
It's
time,
wrong.
but let me just say for the record,
It's wrong.
my aunt's Facebook page has more credibility than you do. I could spend the rest of the day reading your quotes where you make allegations against people and you can't defend them.
You've said nothing about climate change. You quoted everybody from a Marxist
Senator
to
Kane.
all sorts of other people. This has absolutely nothing to do with the topic of the hearing, Senator.
Senator Kane is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two items that I want to talk about. One, some good news. Mr. Painter, you challenged us at the end of your opening testimony, hey, don't just be finger pointing at each other, get something done. And I do think we have to say this hearing is within the still recent aftermath of two really powerful pieces of legislation that Congress has passed to help us battle climate change, to help the United States become leaders in the battle against climate change. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, a number of my colleagues worked hard on this bill, makes significant investments in all kinds of infrastructure. The nation needs it, but including clean energy infrastructure. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, which was partisan, it passed by one vote in the Senate, also really rockets the United States ahead in climate leadership by promoting investments in clean energy. We've seen the effect of this in Virginia. Virginia was one of the worst states in the country in terms of any embrace of wind or solar low carbon energy, at the same time as we were one of the states most vulnerable to sea level rise. But now in both wind deployment offshore, Virginia is becoming a leader not only in deploying wind offshore, but also in becoming a hub of manufacturing of offshore wind components, good for the economy. But also in the solar space, Virginia has moved from sort of bottom 10 deployment to top 10. So the efforts of disinformationists notwithstanding, it's not like Congress has just basically accepted the disinformation and gridlocked. We've taken action, and we can debate too hot, too cold, just right, more steps to take. I believe we do need to take more steps. But I do think Congress is acting on this, and we're acting on it in a way that is rocketing ahead great American innovation, creating jobs, putting us in a position where we can encourage others to do the same, a global leadership position, and I think that's important. And then the other point I wanted to make was with respect to something that Mr. Walter said in his testimony, because I don't want anybody watching this to be confused or disinformed. You used a phrase that said the left wants to silence. The left wants to silence speech it doesn't like. We're talking about disclosure. We're not talking about silencing anyone.